Welcome to the IOSH Rural Industries Group webinar entitled Practical Steps to Returning to Work After Lockdown Part 2. My name's Tina Morgan and I'm the Chair of the IOSH Rural Industries Group Committee. Before we begin, I'd just like to go through a few simple housekeeping rules, if that's okay. So the webinar is scheduled to last for around 1 hour in total. There'll be approximately 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for questions, but please feel free to use the Q&A button at the top of your screen during the presentation, and I will be monitoring these as we go along. At the end of the webinar, I'll ask our presenters to answer as many of the questions raised as we have time for. Any unanswered questions will be posted on the IOSH website. So to start the webinar off, we all know that COVID-19 has caused a great deal of disruption, both in everyday lives, and while some rural industries have been able to carry on working throughout the lockdown period, we've seen many others that have not been able to continue working and have had to get used to what we're now classifying as the new normal. So these changes are continuing to be a great deal bring with it, a great deal of difficulty and a great deal of challenges to businesses and employers. And the webinar that we're about to go through aims to provide some practical advice on how to get back to working safely once we are all able to come out of lockdown. So here in Wales, where I'm based, the lockdown continues, and we have been having weekly updates as to how that's going to affect us in the future. Scotland and Northern Ireland have similar restrictions still in place, whereas England is starting to get back to a little bit more of normality. Now, I know that safety professionals, safety managers and employers alike are all trying to work out how they can get their businesses back, but safely. So today we've got speakers for you who are going to talk to us about the steps that have been taken by the British Horse Society. We have Tim Lord and James Hick. We've also got Andy Stokes, who's going to be speaking to us about the measures and the steps that the RSPB have been taking to make sure that they can safely open their reserves. And they're also dealing with the challenges of having reserves in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So it's going to be great to hear from him. And then we've got Melissa Boys from Vulcan Inspection Services, and she's going to be joined by her colleagues Arthur Wainwright and Andy Kidd, who are going to give us an insight into how Vulcan Inspection Services are going to be able to conduct statutory inspections. So I hope you enjoy the webinar. I'm now going to hand over to Tim Lord and James Hick, who unfortunately can't be with us live, but they have recorded their presentations for us. Please continue to send your Q&A and we can put them to them after the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lord. I'm the chairman of the British Horse Society and the owner of the Berkshire Riding Centre. The Berkshire Riding Centre is in Winkfield, which is between Ascot and Windsor and Maidenhead. Essentially, we have three sorts of business. The first is livery. The second is examinations for the British Horse Society, and the third is lessons. Just so you understand, lessons are the biggest part. They represent 83% of our turnover. What happened when COVID-19 came over? A whole series of restrictions came in place, and we were no longer able to give lessons. So suddenly 83% of our turnover disappeared, but our cost remained at 80% of turnover. So what do? We started to manage our cost base. We looked at what we could cut out that wasn't essential. We maintained support behind horse care, staff and facilities, and we looked to cut costs. We also took advantage of some of the government help, and that was in the area of furloughing staff, of a break in business rates, and of a grant that we got. We also took out a coronavirus business interruption loan. On top of that, we were creative and we looked at alternate ways of making money. One of the ways, we did some crowdfunding and made some funds through a Just Giving page. We persuaded some clients to pay a year in advance, and we persuaded a number of other clients to do things like give donations for the horse that they normally ride. So that was all the background, and we tried to manage our costs, and it has been extremely difficult. Then what happened? There was a partial lifting of restrictions. So what do we do? What it meant for us was that we could start going back and giving private lessons, not group lessons, but private lessons. Historically, private lessons were about 50% of our turnover, and group lessons the other 50%. So it wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. Broadly speaking, we then had to look at how we manage client and staff safety, and that fits into 3 boxes. Risk assessment, understanding what you're going to do about it, communication to staff and to clients, and then the hard measures of what you actually do. So let me talk about that. The first thing we did was to develop some quite comprehensive risk assessments. They're available on our website to download off the facility page. We got help on this through the British Horse Society, but we basically pulled it together and made sure it was totally tailored to what we needed to be doing differently. Then in terms of communication and information, first of all with staff, bear in mind at this stage a number of our staff, 8 of the 13 staff were furloughed, is we sent all of them copies of the risk assessment, told them to make sure that they fully understood it, discussed it with them when they came back, and made sure that there was a high level of knowledge. With clients, we don't necessarily expect them to go through the risk assessment, but we encourage them to. But we ensured that all our notices and communication, which I can talk about in a moment, reflected the outcome of the risk assessments. So, for example, when they went to book online, the first thing they saw was a list of the new constraints. When they arrived, and we also communicated that through Facebook and on our website. When they arrived at our yard, the first thing they saw was a notice board, and I'm going to now talk about that. This is hard measures. So the first thing we did, we put a brand new notice board up there marked COVID-19 measures, and on that we detailed various things that they needed to know before they entered the yard. First thing we said was, if you're more than 5 minutes early, don't come in, wait in your car, and then come in. We identified there were 5 hand washing facilities. There were various hand sanitization points, including one right there next door to the notice board. We made sure that we manage, when they come on the yard, social distancing. We insist that they wear gloves, both when they're riding and when they're off riding. And we said that if they want to bring a guest, which often they do, only one could come, and that person had to wear gloves too. We limited our guests to 1. We closed off parts of the school, like the barn and the tack rooms, and told them that they don't need to access that, and we put in place barriers and signage. If they used our hats, which often people do, we ensured those hats were sanitized before and after use, and they have disposable under hats which they put on, which were obviously the disposable they threw away afterwards, and that was designed to ensure that was sanitary. We modified our first aid procedures, and there's a separate first aid box with coronavirus PPE equipment in it, etc. And we ensured that our 7 first aiders were aware of that. And we implemented contactless management of administration wherever we could. So, for example, you can book in online and pay online. If you pay on the yard, there's a machine. We stopped taking cash. We ensured that in the lavatories, for example, there was one of those Dyson hand dryers, so you didn't even have to touch anything else. And even the vending machines, we had them both converted so they have contactless or telephone payment systems. When it comes to the final part, lessons themselves, the actual lesson, we only offered one-on-one lessons. We then designated every client as either knowledgeable or not knowledgeable. If they were knowledgeable, they were instructed they could go to the stable where the horse was kept, collect the horse. It would have its tack on, or they could put the tack on, and they would take it to the designated place where they were going to have a lesson. If they were not knowledgeable, they were told to go direct to the arena, and someone would bring their horse to them, and at the end of the lesson, collect it. So those broadly are the things that we did. We also tried to ensure that all lessons were held in different locations, and we opened up other locations, unfortunately the weather was good, in the fields, etc. We even went to the length of using headsets, which enabled some of the areas to work better. So where the instructor had a microphone and the rider had a headset, and obviously we changed the little covers on them. We bought a whole lot of those, and they changed those each time. So that's broadly what we did. There were more things, but that gives you a good indication of how we changed our procedures, and so far we think it's worked very well. The key is planning, risk assessment, communication, so everyone knows what they're doing, and then what I would call gentle enforcement. After all, it's a sport, and you want to make sure that that people enjoy themselves when they come. We're now waiting for the next step, which I think after the announcement last week will come quite quickly, whereby we can give group lessons. That will come with its own series of problems, but frankly, they're all manageable if you think it all through. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you.
Well, hello there from the British Horse Society, the BHS. Just 2 minutes. We are a membership society, but a charity. We have 109,000 members, and we have around about 3,000 accredited professional coaches and about 600 or so approved riding schools or livery yards that are BHS approved. And we are also very heavily involved in the wider equestrian community, and particularly around participation. We have 4 charitable aims. Those are safety, welfare, education, and of course access. During the lockdown period, for all of us, this has been hugely disruptive and has needed very careful management by all of us here at the British Horse Society. And we've really been at the forefront of trying to create an environment where we can understand and try and interpret all of the regulations in the most clear and safe way, and be able to communicate that back out to the wider equestrian community. And of course, back in early or mid 17th of March, it's in my mind, we asked all of our employees firstly to work from home. And fortunately, we've got the IT infrastructure to be able to do that very effectively, and have demonstrated that we can do that. We're very quick to then go out to our wider membership to explain at that point in time that we would be working from home. Then of course we put a number of our team members on furlough, and we have about 45 people that are currently on furlough at the moment. But we're still very active in terms of maintaining our charitable aims and supporting the equestrian community. And I guess they fit into a number of different categories for us. Firstly, we were very sure to go out to our volunteers, of which we have around about 1,000 volunteers who do tremendous work for us right across the society. And of course, this week beginning 1st of June, is volunteering week nationally. So we thank our volunteers. We're keen to make sure, of course, that they are following all the government guidelines, and we were not asking them to do anything, of course, that they weren't comfortable with, and indeed were very much about staying at home. So as the lockdown has gone through the last 10 weeks or so, we have developed a coronavirus hub on our website, of which we've had around about 200,000 visitors per week to come and look at the information and the guidance we've been giving out to all those different stakeholders that we work with and represent. So this is at least double the traffic we would normally be handling through our website. And of course, all other social platforms have been very important for us about how we communicate. Particularly Facebook is very big for us in our communication channels. But we've been working hard really across all of our areas, but particularly we know we have had to support our riding schools. And riding schools are critical in terms of the BHS and being able to forward many of our charitable aims. We know their revenue stopped on the 23rd of March, and they still had a large overhead that they had to continue to support, which is looking after horses. Of course, they can't go on furlough, and we need to be able to support all of those as much as we possibly can. So we have set about creating a hardship fund. A very significant amount of money, around about £300,000, was raised through all of our volunteers. Again, a tremendous amount of work. And we've had a hardship appeal that's also been running as well, and that will raise around about £40,000. So in round numbers, we're about £340,000, and that's growing slightly still now. And we've been channeling that back for the welfare of our riding school horses. Now, in terms of further health and safety guidance, this has again been a critical piece of our work, because we have been producing risk assessment documents for the resumption and the very slow and gradual lifting of lockdown that has been going on in the last week or so. And this has been really, really instrumental and critical for our stakeholder group. So we provide risk assessments, we've been providing insight, and we've been supporting each individual who may want to contact us verbally. We've had a help desk that's been open 7 days a week and been open for any question that comes from either our membership or the wider equestrian community. We've had welfare questions as well as coronavirus related types of questions too, and we're receiving several thousand of calls we've had over the last 10 weeks. So another key area that we've provided is for our professional accredited coaches. Now, this group of people again are generally self-employed, and they are out there coaching equestrians, and it's been very important for us again to make sure that we're interpreting government guidelines, we're providing them with risk assessments and explaining how to work safely as we move through the lockdown. And of course we've all had the added complication where the nations have gone in separate ways, so again it's been a case of interpreting the different rules and regulations for the different nations as well.
Thank you for that. That was the videos that were shown that had been pre-recorded for us by Tim Lord and James Hick. And I think there was some really, really valuable information in those. I've had a look at their website and there is absolutely masses of information on there. So if you do want to look at any of the documents that they spoke about or any of their reference information and indeed their coronavirus hub, then you can find all of that at www.bhs.org.uk. And it's interesting that they've also broken down their information on the site into England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland in recognition that they are all working to slightly different rules at the moment. We've had one item on the Q&A at the minute, but it's probably more related to one of our later speakers, so I'm going to hold off on that one for now. I'd like to encourage everyone to please keep using the Q&A. We are looking at them and we will ask them as we go through and also at the end of the sessions. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Andy Stokes. Andy is the Head of Health, Safety and Environment with the RSPB, and he's been with them since 2003. And so he's got a lot of knowledge and experience working with sites that are open to members of the public, huge numbers of volunteers, and also staff. So I'll now hand over to Andy.
Hello everybody, thank you very much for inviting me in for this. I'll try and keep it to the 12.5 minutes I was given by Tina. Just have a look at our phased approach to restarting operations. A little bit different, I think, to some of the very excellent detail we've just seen. So, has that come through now, Tina? The host has said everything's okay. Good.
Yeah, we can see you.
That's all right. Sorry, I thought I'd shared the video. It was up on the shared screen. So a little bit about our phased approach to restarting. So a little bit of context for you. The RSPB, currently the UK's largest nature conservation charity, not necessarily the largest charity, but a bit of context, 220 plus bits of land dotted around from Shetland down to Penzance, Northern Ireland, Welsh woodlands, and all the way through. So varying sizes, anything from a single holding of 21,000 hectares down to a single holding of 25 hectares. A lot of advocacy, lots of membership, 1.2 million, a lot of international work. One of our biggest challenges at the beginning was actually bringing home 12 people from from an Atlantic island called Gough Island, a UK overseas territory, where we were just about to start doing some work, but then had to fetch 12 people off via Ascension Island in the end. And we put about 1,100, in fact, I discovered this morning, of our 2,100 employees onto furlough at the beginning of this. So we had quite a bit of a context to start with. And, you know, let's put this into context. A lot of people have already done this. Hopefully, if you come through here and go, actually, you didn't tell me a lot new, we're doing all of that, maybe that's a good thing, that actually we're all doing the same sort of stuff. Some of my colleagues might even be in here from Visitor Safety, the Woodland Trust, and some of my other colleagues. So listening in. And the great thing about this is there is no real right answer. There isn't anything out there that sets everything perfect. So find a friend. It might be a good thing, call a friend. Good old Chris Tarrant, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But everyone in the sector has been amazing at sharing stuff, and it is really, really good. So this is just another version of it. Brilliant advice. And sadly, very few of the ideas in here are mine. I just nick everybody else's and put them up on slides and share them, because we have a lot of good ideas out there, and we just need to work together on this. And as Tina said, England's mostly opened, but we still have Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland in a very different state of affairs. So what happened for us is we got the exec board on straight away, the principles. And the first principle, I've never heard finance and fundraising directors talk about the safety of people as their top priority in the way that they have been doing. Really key was to retain the trust of people who support us, but also the local communities. We operate in communities, so understanding what the impact of us opening on those local communities is really, really key, and making sure that we're in that context. We've said it's going to be coordinated, it's gradual, it's phased, it's not all at once. 220 reserves all at once was never going to happen. We've got to do it within that 4-country context. We've got to be flexible. And the main thing that we've been enforcing to people is be prepared to close again. This hasn't gone away. And as part of our reopening, we're actually getting ready to close again, because it's likely to happen, if not by the whole UK, maybe regional, maybe country. And that is absolutely part of the phased reopening, is about being ready to close again. The other thing I'm part of, and many of the organisations I work with are part of, is the Visitor Safety Group. And there's a really good piece of guidance out there now that they've worked together to develop. I don't expect you to be able to read all of this. It's just to give you an idea of the guiding principles. The VSG's got about 62 member organisations, lots of land management and country house management organisations. Guiding principles, the key group of the things like the fundamentals, take account of why you're there, conservation, awareness, ensure your visitors know the risks they face. The fundamentals are absolutely still in place. And the key one to focus on for me was the responsibility. So it's a balance between visitor self-reliance and management intervention. Some of it we can do, and some of it we expect the visitor to do. So it's reasonable to expect visitors to exercise responsibility for themselves. We don't think that's gone away. It's reasonable to expect visitors not to put others at risk. Again, a reasonable thing to ask of people attending your sites. And it feels reasonable to expect parents, guardians, teachers, anybody who's in a supervisory role of people in their care to actually look after them. So if you're framing your risk assessment in those sorts of basis, and thinking about this, which is a common for our visitor safety approach, a risk control spectrum. We have sites that are in the heavily developed area all the way through to the undeveloped, top of the Cairngorms for one, next to the M25 at Rainham for the other. And as people move to further away, visitors take increasing responsibility for themselves. Fewer interventions needed as you move further out. It's clearly a greater challenge for managers at the heavily developed end, and the social distancing becomes much, much more critical. Another document that's been uploaded recently and is free to all, the web link is there. It'll be on the presentation when we've finished. COVIDguidance.pdf on the VSG approach. Really, really helpful information. So what did we do? Gradual phased approach. Actually, we needed to start our conservation work first. We've got to ensure wildlife's ready to receive visitors, and that's really, really important. Because actually that's what we're about, nature reserves. It's the infrastructure that's got to be ready. Firstly, therefore, we start to then think about the car parks, the trails where we can. Then we want to viewpoints. And initially, we didn't open some of the more difficult visitor infrastructure, the hides. How do you get people in and out? Manage that. Then we move on to the next step. It's really, really key to phase this. Toilets, hides, reserve officers, and eventually, because we have a number of shops and catering outlets on reserves, but they're much, much further down the line. The sorts of things we had to take account of, site assessment checks. So what we did was each site decided what they wanted to do. We set some standards, and if you can get the right staff, equipment and everything, you'd be allowed to open it. If you can't, you weren't. We also had to take account the local community sentiment, the actions of partners, people around us, other very local visitor attractions. We often border on others that are the same. So we're trying to work with them to have a same impact in the same area. What about our site design constraints? Can we have one-way paths? Can we have loops? But in particular for us, we had reserves that had no people on them for about 10 weeks. And now we've got breeding birds, Schedule 1 breeding birds, on paths that they've never bred on before. So we had some really significant safety of species concerns. And of course, we didn't furlough everybody, but the ones that stayed here were absolutely knackered when we started to open. So how do you manage to plan for that fatigue and bringing people back to help? So we developed some return to work checklists. We've got to induct people into the new ways of working. How do you manage the individual circumstances, people who still have childcare or vulnerable people care? It's really, really important. Everybody's been leading remotely. How many Teams meetings have we all been on for the last couple of weeks, couple of months? It's been amazing. But I am fed up of staring at people on the screen. So actually how we manage those people and talk to the people and who have then got to get out there has been really, really important. So we developed a hub. And on that hub, we've started to put, and this is an internal hub, reserves risk assessments, hygiene instructions, mothballing, that sort of stuff around recommissioning buildings that have come out, Legionella assessments, inspections. Then about the visitor ops on site, how do we engage with the public now? Frequently asked questions up there, but also things like a visitor code of conduct, a script for talking to the public, PPE that's going up there, welcome posters, markings on the ground for how we actually expect people to use. Signage hub, so we're now creating some signs. I know a lot of organisations have this. You go on, pick your own, print it out, put it out on the site. What materials, what PPE? Can we do this organisation-wide procurement? Actually, our logistics hub is closed because we can't make it COVID compliant. Nobody wants to sell us any perspex. So how do we get everything out there? How are we going to travel around? We used to move people around in 4x4s, several of them. We've got a struggle now to get people safely into vehicles, so safe travel guidance. How we work from home safely, everybody's doing it, new setup checklists, all that sort of stuff. And then a mix of things around operations, our reserves, but also functional activities, such as our fundraising, which has stopped. You know, a lot of our income has dried up because we're not actually operating out on site. So developing these resources and making them available. Making sure that our people are supported. So yes, our line managers, we've established an RSPB Well program. Lovely, catchy name that nobody can quite say. They stick too many B's in there. And this is really about all advice on sleeping, all sorts of, and about engaging your mental health, your mental well-being, how to work well from home, how to keep happy and safe and healthy. We have an assistance program which has seen a bit of a rise in use. We have some mental health first aiders. iLearn is our online learning resource, which has had some new coronavirus materials added onto it. An open forum called Let's Talk on a Yammer group, and then some intranet and a restart hub. So as much information as we could has been out there for our people. Even more important has been keeping with our supporters. So we're lucky we have 1.2 million members, and most of those have been on side with what we've been trying to do. But the message, safety of our people, is most important, and that's gone down really, really well. We've had a lot of positivity about not rushing at this, reflecting the difference in the approach according to the 4 countries, and actually focusing, getting the critical conservation work so that the species is protected. That's our mission, and therefore we can't put that at risk. We are encouraging people to stay local and trying to have that access to green space in their local areas, and we're regularly thanking people that stay with us. It's been really, really important to keep on top of that. So what's our key takeaways? Sadly, it's all about toilets. If you've got them, you're going to have to work out how to open them. Then the amount of problems we've had when we haven't, and the National Trust, the Woodland Trust, all of those organisations we're talking with, the amount of time I've spent on toilet cleaning guidance is absolutely disproportionate with the amount I really know about it. But it is about getting those facilities and functions right. Plan to unfurlough more people than you think. So our plans in Scotland have just had to change because of the impact of how we did it in England. And we're actually going to have to unfurlough more people to get ready because we didn't unfurlough enough and we've put our staff under pressure. So learning from the lessons in England, Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland will unfurlough differently. A really big one through the visitor safety group in particular, your first audiences are not going to be the same as your old ones. Our supporters have actually listened to our messages and are staying local and are coming out very carefully. People who normally don't engage with us are actually coming out not so carefully. And along with my colleagues in many other organisations, we've had a lot of dumping, we've had a lot of fly tipping, we've had a lot of vandalism, we've had some fires started, we've had some aggressive individuals breaking gates down and approaching us. We've had people driving around the sites, parking in gates, blocking emergency services. We've got some unpleasant behaviour. And our message to our staff is, you don't deal with it, you call the police. We are very, very definitely saying to our people, you're not there to police the social distancing, you're there to enable people to enjoy it. Communication about what's expected. And the other thing we've struggled with is the mindset of the workers. In February 2020, we were in state A. Marvellous. The next 4 months, we've been in state B. Most of our staff actually think we're going to be able to go back to state A, and we can't. So think about what state C looks like. It's not the same as state A, and plan for state C and possibly state D in October and November onwards. And the final thing for me is comms. You can't do enough. Keep on telling them. Telling them that you're going to tell them something, tell them, and then tell them that you told them it. But the staff and our volunteers and our public really like being kept informed. We've had all user emails from our people director 3 times a week for months, and they are welcome. We've taken that feedback. So keep people informed, really, really important. I think that's me done. I'll take any questions, as Tina says, later on.
Thanks, Andy. That was great. It was some really interesting information there. I liked the references to the visitor safety group as well. The visitor safety group, for those of you who haven't visited them, go along and have a look at the information that they've put out, because there's loads of great information in there. Their booklets I still use and still refer to people to them. So that's absolutely brilliant information, and we will have some questions later on. I can see that Melissa, our next speaker, is absolutely champing at the bit to get going, as she shared her screen with us already. So if I could just ask Andy if you could just stop your video for me, and then Melissa, if you'd like to start sharing your video. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Melissa, who is an account director for Vulcan Inspection Services, and she's going to be joined by Arthur Wainwright, who is their health and safety manager, and Andy Kidd, who is one of their chief engineers. And they're going to talk to us all about how we can ensure that statutory inspections can be carried out on machinery and equipment safely. So I'll hand over to them now.
Thank you very much, Tina. Hello, everybody. My name is Melissa Boys. I'm the account director for Vulcan Inspection Services, and the relationship that we have with NFU Mutual. I think the takeaway message from us today is that during COVID-19, nothing has really changed, because our surveys have been classed as an essential service by the HSE. And I'm going to come on to talk to some of the guidance that the HSE have been sharing with us throughout COVID. I'm going to talk a little bit, just really briefly, about who we are, just so that you kind of understand how we fit into the sector and how we work with NFU Mutual. I've got a really brief overview of the regulations for anybody who doesn't know those. I'm going to talk about the HSE's stance around inspections during COVID, and then what we've done to try and help our customers during COVID, because obviously it's been a really difficult time for everybody. And then what you need to think of really from a business point of view to make sure that you're back up and running safely. Okay, so Vulcan Inspection Services is a trading name. We're actually part of the British Engineering Services Group, but we use that name exclusively for NFU Mutual. And we've worked with NFUM since 1997, so we know NFU Mutual customers really well across all different sectors, but specifically agriculture as well. And we've got about 19,000 customers through NFU Mutual. We've got a dedicated account management team. We're normally based in Stratford-upon-Avon, but obviously we've all been working at home for the last few months like everybody else. And we have around 380 engineer surveyors nationwide, and they provide coverage for all of the main regulations. This is the team that's online today. So as well as myself, we've got Andy Kidd, who's our chief engineer, and Arthur Wainwright, who's our group health and safety manager. So if we have any questions around PPE or technical questions, hopefully they can answer them for you if I can't. Okay, so the main regulations. The main regulations that we kind of govern plant and machinery in the inspections are the provision and use of work equipment regulations, PUR, the lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations, LOLA, pressure system safety regulations, and the control of substances hazardous to health. Obviously, we've got electricity at work regulations as well, but for today, I'm trying to kind of stick just to plant and machinery on the basis that we've only got 12 or 13 minutes. This is just at a really high level, just so that if you're not aware of what these regulations are, you can go away and get some more details. PUA applies to the use, maintenance and inspection of all work equipment. So that might be a pair of step ladders, it might be a tower crane. And there needs to be a risk assessment to make sure that it's the right equipment for the job, that it's properly maintained, that the people who use it are competent to use it. And if the equipment's likely to deteriorate, it has to be inspected at regular intervals by a competent person. Now, the levels of PUA vary to the levels of competency under LOLA, because clearly you don't need an engineer surveyor to have a look at a pair of step ladders or a hand shovel. But obviously if it's a more complicated piece of equipment, then you might well do. And specifically under the PUA regulations, power presses need to be inspected. So the LOLA regulations, these are probably a little bit more relevant really to the agricultural sector, and they apply to all work equipment which is used for lifting or lowering a load, including its attachments which are used for anchoring or fixing. And it also applies to chains and slings. Again, the user or owner needs to do a risk assessment to make sure that it's the right piece of equipment for the job. So for example, if you're lifting somebody up on a telescopic handler, you're not putting them on the forks or in a potato box on the front, but that you're using a properly constructed man basket. That it's in a safe environment, so the equipment's safe for the environment that it's in. Again, that people are properly trained, that it's properly maintained, and finally, whether a thorough examination by a competent person is required. And LOLA applies to all industries, including agriculture. I think sometimes with the kind of farming community that we speak to, they sometimes get a little bit confused as to how the regulations apply, but they definitely apply to farming as well. Pressure system safety regulations, these apply to all users and owners of systems which use steam and gas under pressure and other relevant fluids. The first time we go to see a customer, we ask to see if they have a written scheme of examination. If they don't have one, then we will put one in place. And it's a little bit like a logbook on a car, and it dictates what is included as part of that system. So if it's a big steam boiler, it will look at things like the pipe work, the pressure gauges, the safety valves, all those kind of things. And it will dictate how often that needs to be inspected. So how often it needs to have a thorough examination where it's all stripped down, or a working exam. One thing to note is that the customer does need to prepare the plant for inspection. So if it's a cafe steam boiler, for example, we'd normally expect the customer to arrange for the service engineer to be there the same day as us, so they can strip it down for the inspection. The exception to that is simple air receivers, where our engineers will try and open the air receiver. And finally, the COSHH regulations, control of substances hazardous to health. Again, it's a risk-based approach. Again, you should look for ways of minimising the danger from fumes and harmful substances. But if the process that you're undertaking actually is using, creating those substances, then you need to have a way of reducing the risk. So most people will have local exhaust ventilation. If you use local exhaust ventilation, then that is subject to a thorough examination by a competent person as well at regular intervals. And it's something the HSE have been quite hot on recently. They've been doing proactive inspections of sites to make sure that if people have LEV, that it's been inspected and it's been installed properly. And furthermore, since late 2019, the HSE have changed the rules on mild steel welding to say that if you're doing any kind of mild steel welding, then you need to have local exhaust ventilation equipment, even if it's outdoors. So if you're doing mild steel welding outdoors, you need to have LEV. Okay, so we're often asked who can examine plant and machinery. Well, the regulations state that the person must have the appropriate practical, theoretical and actual knowledge of the equipment that they're inspecting, and that they have to be able to act without fear or favour. The regulations say that if when we're on site we find a defect which is likely to cause imminent danger to people or property, then we have to issue an immediate defect report, and we have to send a copy of that to the local enforcement authority, which is normally the HSE. Even if the item is repaired on site, we still have to send a copy of that report, but obviously the surveyor would put a note on there to say that it had been removed from service while he was there, or it had been repaired, for example. And the regulations also lay out what the format of the report should include as well, so it's quite strict. implications of not having an inspection, obviously interruption to business. And the overriding thing in all of this is safety and protecting your employees. But obviously, if you were to have an accident, there would be significant interruption to that business while, you know, it was investigated. Fines or prosecution, and also as well the HSE's fee for intervention charging scheme. So under fee for intervention, failing to have a thorough examination of your piece of equipment or failing to maintain it properly are both classed as material breaches of health and safety, and therefore possibly chargeable under the fee for intervention charging scheme. So the HSE stance during COVID, so like I said at the start, nothing has changed really in terms of the industry. The HSE made it clear very early on during the COVID outbreak that there would be no derogation and that all of the regulations remain the same. I've actually taken this wording directly from the HSE guidance so that there's no ambiguity, but what they say is that the law for LOLA and PSSR remains in place. They actually reissued some more guidance late yesterday, which says, which talks about all the other regulations as well. So they've absolutely enforced the fact that all of these regulations are still in place. They go one step further in saying that if businesses are closed, they should still give access to our inspectors to undertake thorough examinations. Obviously, we've been doing these examinations with social distancing as safely as we can. And obviously, we've got Arthur online. So if we've got any questions about that at the end, I'm sure he'll be happy to take those. The guidance also says that we should ensure that social distancing measures in the workplace aren't perceived to be a barrier for thorough examinations. The HSE also say that if businesses experience problems in undertaking scheduled thorough examinations, they should adopt a risk-based approach or decide to stop using the equipment. And again, the overarching legal obligation remains, i.e. that equipment has to be safe to use. And the HSE have just recently announced that they're going to be restarting their proactive inspections as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what we've been doing. So as a business, we're quite fortunate, really. All of our staff have mobile technology. So with effect from Monday, the 16th of March, everybody in the business just picked up their PCs and went to work from home. Obviously, our surveyors were told that we were essential services. So they were all given letters to say that they could be out and about on the roads. And as best as possible, we have maintained our inspection service. We've had very minimal sickness. And what we've been doing is we have a diary management system that provides quite good analytics on our inspection programme. And we've been using that to proactively manage our customers. So what we kind of worry is that at some point down the line, everybody's going to kind of reopen and everybody's going to suddenly want their inspections doing. So we've been calling customers to check whether they're open. And if they are, we've been booking them in, and we've been trying to bring the next couple of months worth forward, if we can, to create some extra capacity for late summer, because we expect in late summer, all of a sudden, everybody's going to want to have their inspections done. So we've been working really closely with the NFU Mutual and with our customers to try and get as many people booked in as possible. So what do you need to do? If you have plant or equipment, I think probably that the first thing you need to do is check your inspection due dates. If your inspections are overdue or they're imminent, I would advise that you contact your regular inspection provider as soon as possible to agree dates. Like I've just said, there may be a point in the next couple of months where everybody suddenly wants their inspections completed, and there may be an issue with capacity in the industry. Maintain your equipment. So if you haven't been using it for a little while, it might be a good time now to get it serviced. And actually, if you were to have it serviced before us or somebody else comes to do your inspection, we're less likely to find any defects on it then. So again, it's all about being safe. And the overriding factor in all of this is safety. So make sure you have the right equipment for the job and it has been thoroughly examined and it is safe for use. Okay, in summary then, thorough examinations are a statutory requirement, and this hasn't changed during COVID. You must ensure that the plant is safe to use, has been properly maintained, and arrange for your thorough examinations to be completed if they're due. If you'd like any further information, your local NFU Mutual agent will be able to talk you through what the requirements are. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Tina.
Thanks, Melissa. That was great. And I would like to now invite everyone to unmute themselves, all of our panelists, and share your videos if you wouldn't mind. And what we're going to do then is open up a Q&A. Just before we open up that Q&A, if I could ask Ben Pollard, who is looking after this session for us today, to launch a poll, which I would like to encourage everyone to please complete. The poll is there really to give us feedback on this session, to let us know what you thought about the presentations that you've just watched, the content and the speakers, so that we can make sure that any future presentations are correctly aimed at our participants. Okay, so if you could fill those in, that would be absolutely brilliant. So there have been some Q&As that have come in as we've been going through the sessions, and I think some of these may well be aimed towards Andy Kidd and Arthur Wainwright. So if you've got your vocal cords nicely tuned and ready to go, I'll dip into the Q&As that we have. So the first one I've got here is from an anonymous attendee, and it says that some companies are now returning to normal working. So things like security alarms, they're returning to normal working. And some companies are starting to make routine annual maintenance visits, as we've discussed, you guys have been continuing to do. And the visits are involving both commercial and domestic customers. The question was, do we think that those visits should still be continuing when government guidance is not to allow visitors into your home? Now, I know most of yours are not actually carried out in domestic premises, and they're carried out on commercial premises and quite often farms, and the farmer can stand at his farm gate and allow you to go about your businesses. But what are your views on that? Would anyone like to particularly throw their hand up and say, we'll talk about that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Arthur's going to take that one.
Hello, everybody. I think that one falls into my remit fairly and squarely. It's an interesting point. Very early on in the pandemic, as a business, we made some certain commercial decisions around residential properties versus commercial properties. And as you rightly said, Tina, the commercial properties were actually relatively easy to cover off in our COVID-19 risk assessment that we produced early on. With regards to residential properties, we took a very strict stance very, very early on in that we would not do them. So our commercial teams had a number of conversations with, we do a lot of residential properties, housing associations, sheltered housing and things like that. So our commercial team spoke to those businesses and advised them at present we wouldn't do any residential properties, primarily to protect their residents. However, we are now seeing an easing of that. We've come up with, we've revised our risk assessment to cover that. We've come up with an easing whereby we are using the appropriate PPE, and we're having conversations with the client to have conversations with the residents prior to us turning up. So obviously, if there's any doubt, if there's any risk at all regarding anybody's health and safety, we abort the inspection. But primarily, we've worked with the client, and we are now supplying our engineers with the relevant PPE. So engineers will be going into residential properties with face fit tested masks and goggles. We're also requesting from the clients that the residents stick to the social distancing guidelines wherever possible. However, the underlying thing remains still that if our engineer feels that they're at risk or they could put the resident at risk, we will abort the inspection. But it's just with careful planning where we are restarting the residential properties again.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I'm sure you thoroughly answered the question.
Add to that, possibly, is that most of our inspections are a legal requirement, certainly on commercial premises where the Health and Safety Work Act applies. In some residential premises, the Health and Safety Work Act doesn't apply. So the equipment, strictly speaking, is not statutorily required for inspection, whereas we can take a more lenient approach on that one. I think this question talked about alarm systems and alarms, and to the best of my knowledge, it's not a legal requirement to have an alarm system maintained or inspected, certainly not on the lower or pure or anything like that. So that could be delayed until we're in a safer position.
I think you're absolutely right on that. There are things like fire alarms and smoke alarms and visual inspection by the owner and the employer can make sure that those are still staying in working condition, carrying out routine testing and maintenance of them, and then getting the engineers in when it is safe to do so, and referring back to fire risk assessments and things like that. So I think there is a big onus on employers to be also implementing measures to keep their workplace safe as well. Thank you for that. We've also got a question here that says, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to answer this one, but it's for very small particles suspended in air. How do the speakers deal with ventilation in enclosed spaces? And that's come from Brian Dundas. Anyone fancy that one?
Andy?
Well, it's interesting. Andy's smiling, but we've actually had Andy and myself had a conversation about this morning, and that there is a little bit of ambiguity at the moment, which we're trying to clarify with the HSE, because we have had there is a little bit of guidance out there that we're not sure is correct at this moment in time, and again, it's all in the air at the moment. I think it's something that you need to assess, because depending on what you read and where you read it depends on what the answers are regarding size of particles. So, for instance, they're saying that some guidance is that around that some of the smaller particles, if it's in a ventilated area, will dissipate into the atmosphere, whereas some of the heavier particles will fall onto surfaces that potentially could cross-contaminate. And the problem then is you then get a counter argument about the size of the COVID particles. So it is very much, I think, a watch this space on that one. I don't know whether Andy wants to add anything to that.
Not much more to add. I mean, there's lots of guidance around about face coverings, face masks and things like that, which will prevent any issues with smaller particles, but we just got to watch and see, really.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so the next one is it absolutely necessary for small and medium businesses to engage a water hygiene specialist before reoccupying their business premises?
Again, do you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Again, it's the HSE guidance, and there's some fundamental guidance that have actually come down by the HSE in the last couple of weeks, is that particularly where there's hot water taps should be run for a reasonable length of time before the premises are reoccupied. And by running that should hopefully remove any problems. I think the intimation there is around Legionella. But there is some HSE have published various guidance on reoccupying premises. It's small or large where those particular types of installations stand.
Brilliant. Okay. I've got a question here on PPE, so I'm afraid it's probably going to be Arthur again.
Well there, Arthur.
Yeah.
So I've got one here from Emmanuel, and he says, for how long would you recommend an employee who's returning to work use their PPE, like nose, like face respiratory protection, particularly sort of disposable protection, because he's mentioned about regular inhalation of their own CO2 potentially causing health risks to them as well?
That's an interesting point. There's no guidance to how long you should wear your face protection. And now we've talked about two different types of face protection here. We talked about face coverings and face masks. Obviously things have changed since the government announcement yesterday regarding face coverings on public transport. And anything really acts as a face covering, whether it be a scarf or an old t-shirt cut up or anything like that. With regards to face fit tested masks, whether it be a dust mask or a respirator, again, it's a difficult one. It depends on the environment they're in and how it's being used. And really, the risk needs to be assessed beforehand. And if there's questions around at work where there's other people, again, there's guidance on how long you should wear as fit tested masks. You know, you shouldn't really do anything for any length of time. I think, again, the guidance is slightly different, but I would suggest that breathing in my CO2 is probably slightly better than catching COVID-19. But so as to how long they should wear it, it really depends on your risk assessments for that individual and the type of work they're doing. It's a difficult one to pinpoint into a specific answer.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thanks for giving it a go anyway. I think none of us put our hands up at that point. I'm just going to do one more question, and then I'm going to leave the remaining questions. We will answer them, but on the IOSH website. But I'm going to just do this last one, and this one is for Andy Stokes, who was sitting there comfortably thinking he'd escaped most of the questions. So this one I think comes to you, Andy, because you did mention it in your presentation about how you've been using online team meetings, Zoom meetings, things like that to continue to collectively communicate with your staff. Do you think that's going to continue being a new normal, even when businesses come out of lockdown?
Yes, I don't know, can people hear and see me?
Yeah.
Absolutely, and in fact one of the things we've found is that it's created an equality that we've not had before. So many of the meetings that people used to attend, I work remotely from my headquarters colleagues. 5 of them would sit in a room and I'd be on a TV in the corner and felt slightly disengaged from the meeting. And in fact now all of us are on the same sort of screen and same setup. It's created a much fairer and more equal set of meetings, and it's enabled people who perhaps in the past haven't been able to contribute to get engaged. We are keeping our offices closed, other than the ones that we need open to manage the reserves properly. But we're keeping our main offices, regional, country, area-based offices. They're going to stay closed till at least the end of August. We will review early August to see whether we can and will reopen them. But I think the new norm, as the phrase has sort of been bandied around, is that we will move to a much more flexible pattern of working. Many people want the contact that offices bring. Mental health wise, a lot of people struggling not to have that. But at the same time, they're also enjoying the freedom to not always have to commute into the office. So I think it's really forcing us down a route that probably we ought to have gone for equality and diversity issues anyway, in saying that the approach will be, where are you best placed to work for the bulk of your time? That's where we'll give you the kit and put it on your desk. But if you want to come in 2 days a week into an office, you'll lift your laptop up and you'll go and work somewhere else. And that is actually equalising things quite a lot for our very disparate workforce.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Andy. Just very quickly, that last question came from Alan Plom, who was the chair of IOSH RIG up until January this year. So he's joining in and keeping us on our toes. And he asked the question, have they dropped the countryside from the VSG now? Because it used to be the VSCG.
And you're absolutely right, they have. The group is now 62 members strong. It covers the UK and the island of Ireland. So we have about 10 or 12 member organisations in Southern Ireland. And the reason the countryside aspect has dropped is because a number of organisations that have just historic houses, just sort of the built environment, felt that the principles are the same, but calling them countryside was probably the wrong thing. So it is around visitor safety and visitor safety group. It's managed by a board of 9 of the members of the organisations. We each have a term of 3 years, with 3 members sort of changing every year. And yeah, the workshops that we run are currently, clearly they would have been face-to-face, they're now suspended, so they're starting to do some webinars. I think there was even one yesterday, probably on a very similar topic to what we've just done today.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. We're just in the last couple of minutes, so I would just like to end the session by thanking all of our speakers today and all of those who joined us as well as participants. Without you, we would be just sat talking to a screen, so thank you all for coming online and joining in. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar today, and I hope it's given you some good information. We've had a couple of people asking about the presentations and how they can get hold of them. We will be sending out a link to the presentation recording to the email address that you registered under, so please look out for the email. It has been recorded. It will be uploaded onto the IOSH YouTube channel, so you can see it there. We'll also pop some links on the IOSH Rural Industries Group website, and also through our social media on LinkedIn. So I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone. Thank you to Ben Pollard, who's hiding behind the little IOSH Webinars screen at the bottom there. And also to Tina Lee, who is our relationship manager at IOSH, and to all of the IOSH Rural Industries Group Committee who have helped in pulling this together. So thank you all very much, and I will end the webinar there. Thanks everyone.